And that is a good introduction to bring us to our next speaker. And I choose this combination by intention, that I said, let's learn a little bit about intuition in Google, intuition in a corporation, in a big corporation, who had come up and is coming up with innovative products, but also in an economic system which is trying to dominate an ecosystem, and is working with the technology and artificial technology, artificial intelligence. So I asked Nipun to think about what we can do and how this dance between the algorithm and the intuition might have a broader effect and on the population in the world. Nipun is somebody I know for many years now. He studied computer science as well in Berkeley, California. He was born and raised there. He grew up in the Valley, so in the technology hub in America. But he also then, after a while, stepped out and quit this career path and founded a movement called Service Space. And in Service Space, what he did is they are initiating project which is completely done by volunteers and not focused on making money, but focused on community and building up a community and a relationship to people. And that is, I think, a big foundation for intuition. A lot of projects came up in the last 12 years. I think they have over 1 million members around the world. And Nipun will talk about the dance between algorithm and intuition based on his personal experience, based on his experience with Service Space. And welcome on stage, Nipun Mehta.
Thank you. Thank you. And Hannah, thank you for the water. She keeps doing this for all the speakers, and I just am always moved by acts of kindness. Absolutely. Thank you. It's been a joy to be here amongst all of you, so many open-hearted people. Today I want to talk about this very interesting tension between algorithms and intuition, algorithms and love. Algorithms, of course, are a set of sort of recipes, set of instructions that help us filter data on the outside. But intuition is something that helps us with a lot of data on the inside. And that inside data is doesn't have the same kind of boundaries as data on the outside. So there's a very interesting tension, and I want to explore that today. This is a movie I saw many years ago. Tom Cruise opens in this movie in his dashing style, and he goes and arrests somebody, and he says, "Sir, you're under arrest." And the guy says, "What for?" "For a crime you're about to commit." And you look at that and we say, wow, that's very sci-fi, futuristic, except that there's hundreds of cities around the world that are now doing this kind of predictive policing. And when you look at that, when I looked at it, when I first came out, you sort of fantasize about this kind of, wow, that's kind of cool, right? If you can predict all of this. And not just cool, it sounds even a bit humanitarian. You can actually save lives in that way. But as you explore a little bit more, as I sort of explored it a little bit more, things started to unravel in a different way, which I want to share. I'll take you through a little bit of my personal journey because it involves algorithms and love. I started off with this unrelenting pursuit of success. I think like all of us. In college, I studied computer science. I used to love to code. Since 7th grade, I've been coding, and even to this day, every day that I'm home, I'm coding. I love computers and what it can do. But for me, initially, it was driven by this extrinsic motivation. You know, I had my job in my first and only job was at Sun Microsystems, which is now part of Oracle. Incidentally, I used to work at the same campus, which is now the Facebook headquarters. I don't know if I should be proud of that. But I was optimizing C++ compilers. And that became my life. So it's almost like if I had to go from point A to point B, I would never, you'd say, well, what's the shortest line? I mean, what's the shortest path from point A to point B? A straight line. So I would never go from this street over there, take a left and go there. I would always try to go at 45-degree angles, you know. And that subsumed me for a little bit, for a few years in my early 20s. And then I realized that that wasn't really satisfying me. Just extrinsic rewards wasn't quite enough. So I started to go explore different things, and one amongst them that landed was service, serving other people and the community. We started an organization called Service Space, and it started in the Silicon Valley in 1999. And it was initially building websites for nonprofits, and now it's doing a lot of other things. But after a while, even service, which was partly extrinsic motivations, extrinsic impact, and partly intrinsic motivations, wasn't quite where I landed. I was exploring more. And as I went farther end of the spectrum, I realized that what really moved me was this idea of stillness. And in stillness, I found connection. Right? I fell into that connection. This is a photo, actually, of my wife and I on a walking pilgrimage in India that we took. We went to the Gandhi ashram because Gandhi was very inspiring for us, and we said, we're going to walk south. We're going to eat whatever food is offered and sleep wherever place is offered. And we essentially survived purely on the kindness of strangers. So on one side, we had algorithms that's still very much a part of my life. And on the other end, you had something that was very intrinsic, which was love. And how do those things come together? That became an organizing question, partly in my life, and I think it's a question that we're all exploring in the era that we live in. Going back to Minority Report, this was what is known as predictive policing, as I said, algorithms that determine crimes before they actually happen. But it's not just limited to crime. This is how we give out bank loans. This is actually how we hire public school teachers. This is how we scout sporting teams and talent. It's all over the place. And that really begs the question, can we predict everything? And underneath it, the question is, can we control everything? Google certainly thinks so. Right, this is Ray Kurzweil, who's the engineering director at Google. And he says, look, our company is going to be able to know you better than your spouse. And this is an exact quote. He says, Google will know the answer to your question before you have asked it. Right? It will have read every email you've written, every document, every idle thought you've tapped into a search engine box. It will know you better than even your intimate partner, better perhaps than even yourself. Something to hold. Right? And the formula that is used for, and this is not just Google, this is all the tech industries, right? This is sort of the narrative in which we are embedding our technology solutions of the day. And so the formula that is being used for this is you take a lot of computing power, and we have lots of it. Moore's law has predicted accurately for decades how computing power continues to increase. They say that they predict that in 15 years, it's probably going to be sooner than 15, it might even be 10, that in 15 years, one chip is going to be able to do more transactions than the brains of all human beings put together. Massive computing power. I mean, stuff that used to take entire rooms is now all in our pockets just in a few decades. And if that continues to go exponentially, you can imagine that we would have that world. So what do you do with that computing power? You add to it data, big data. Right? We're constantly extracting all kinds of patterns, all kinds of data from us. Your cellular provider, in ways that we may not even expect it, your cellular provider, for example, may actually know whether you rushed to get here or whether you're driving slow. You didn't necessarily give them that information, but based on how fast your phone traveled, it kind of knows. And that sounds benign singularly, but when you add all this stuff up, it adds up to a lot of interesting kinds of intelligence. But that alone is not enough. Data alone is not enough. What you need to add to it are algorithms. Algorithms are a set of instructions that pick up certain patterns in data that make the data intelligent. Right? Algorithms are everywhere. If you took Uber here, that's a set of, all your apps are a set of algorithms. If you use GPS, that's a bunch of algorithms. If you cross this traffic light, that's a bunch of algorithms. Everything around us is embedded in these algorithms, and now they have these algorithms which are self-learning, which means they teach themselves. And a lot of machine learning and deep learning of today, what is more commonly known as artificial intelligence, is baked in this. And artificial intelligence, you say, well, what all can it do? So far, it's been pretty impressive, right? It's won at chess and AlphaGo, but it's also better than human beings at playing poker. It's also better at reading lips. And you say, okay, well, that's great. It can read tattoos better than human beings, fantastic. But it can also accurately, more accurately, detect heart attacks in human beings than doctors can. So algorithms have a very interesting place in our world. In fact, the Google CEO said, we used to be a mobile-first company, now we are an AI-first company. Right? AI has a lot of power. So what you end up with when you put computing power with big data, with algorithms, sophisticated algorithms, is you get control. And you can use that control in many ways. We're certainly using it. There's an argument to be made that algorithms save lives. And they do. There's no point in denying that. Right? A human being, if a bunch of us have to actually make 2 million prescriptions, we'll make 20,000 errors. Algorithms make 0 errors. So you say, okay, fantastic. You can go down the list and you can make a pretty strong case that algorithms do actually save some lives. But they also have some downsides. Right? This is actually Peter Domingos. He says, if every algorithm suddenly stopped working, it would be the end of the world as we know it. We can't get away from it. Not only are they powerful, they help in some ways, they have some challenges, which I'll get into, but they are everywhere. Right? They are embedded into the fabric of our daily lives. So we owe it to ourselves to really explore the effect of algorithms. One of its biggest weaknesses is it's largely opaque. Who debates algorithms? Who says, well, that's not how it should have been? It's usually this dark black box that we don't know about. And these black boxes are more or less controlled by corporations whose primary interest is to maximize profit, which means is to turn its users into consumers. And that can be problematic. It also perpetuates a lot of bias, implicit biases that were already there. Creates these filter bubbles. In the US, certainly, we have this whole fake news phenomena that's happening, and that's in large part because of these filter bubbles. And it strips us of a lot of creativity, of a lot of choices, and really serendipity. Because if everything is formulaic, where is the serendipity? Cathy O'Neill wrote a book called Weapons of Math Destruction. And in this book, she makes a very compelling case. She says that actually algorithms unfairly, she goes example after example of how algorithms unfairly punish the underprivileged. And we can talk a lot about that, but she actually sums it up perfectly in one sentence, a very short sentence. She says, algorithms simply automate the status quo, things as they are. Now, if you look at the status quo, where are things? This is status quo of inequality. 9 men own more financial wealth than the bottom 3.5 billion people. Right? This is just as of a few months ago. This is another status quo, disconnection. This is everybody taking a selfie with Hillary Clinton when she was running for president. No one is looking at her. Right? And we've created these devices, we've created these solutions, and by itself, we can't make fun of the younger folks because by itself, this is what we've equipped them with. But how have we created this world where you're just an object for pixels for me to grab to put on my Facebook wall, and I don't really even care about looking at you? This is status quo. This is also status quo. If you look at our markets, this is Reid Hoffman, the CEO of LinkedIn. And this is his quote in the Wall Street Journal. And it says, social networks do best when they tap into one of the 7 deadly sins. Facebook is ego. Zynga is sloth. LinkedIn, his own company, is greed. And so here you have a guy who's succeeded at the market economies, and he's saying our organizing principles, he himself is saying that, our organizing principles are the 7 deadly sins. And the question you can hold, the question I think all of us hold, is what about the 7 viral virtues? And if that's not coming out of the market, where is that going to come out of? Right? And this is status quo that we have been propagating. And when you propagate this kind of status quo, when you amplify this kind of status quo in the world, it shouldn't be a surprise that we see headlines like this. A beauty contest was judged by AI, artificial intelligence, and the robots didn't really like dark skin. And you say, well, okay, maybe that's just one-off case. This is Joy Buolamwini at MIT. She was using facial recognition software, and this facial recognition software didn't recognize her. Why? Because the people who coded that algorithm didn't actually account for darker skin and the kind of facial structure she had. And you say, whoa, wait a second, that doesn't sound right. So she actually started a whole movement, Coding for Rights, which is now changing that. But it raises a lot of interesting alarms for a lot of things that go under the surface, below the radar for us. So algorithms at the end of the day are really only good as the data you provide it. IBM did this experiment with this bot, where a lot of you might be on Twitter. Right? So they created this chat bot, right? This artificially intelligent machine that would respond to chats based on what people give it. And in a couple hours, they had to shut it down. This is the Tay bot. This was actually Tay's Twitter account, because it was spewing out, in just a matter of a couple hours, this AI machine was spewing out stuff like this. Right? Bush did 9/11, Hitler would have done an even better job than I don't even want to read it. Right? And they said, okay, this is racist, this is xenophobic. This wasn't just one tweet, it was continual tweets like this, and said, okay, shut it down, didn't work. So you look at that and you say, there are 2 ways you can go with this. One approach is, let's just get more data, right? Because it didn't have enough data. You know, it was a small enough sample size, let's get more data. Which means you really start saying, let's go from big data to bigger data. And how far can big data go? Well, if you ask a lot of corporations, they'll say, well, we can go pretty far. You know, I don't know if you know, but Facebook, even when, of course you know they're tracking you in all kinds of ways, but even when you hover your mic, not your mic, even when you hover your mouse over a link, it wants to keep track of that. Because it says, oh, that's where you gazed. In Gmail, when you're typing, even when you backspace something and you delete a line which never actually went anywhere, it's keeping track of that. And you say, wow, well, you can go, you know, it's endless what you can do with a lot of this stuff. But how far can that really take us? And to illustrate that, well, here's the Time magazine. This is not a photoshopped Time magazine cover. Google says, well, let's try to solve death. They're spending billions of dollars on it. Now, solving death, well, what does that even mean? Right? That means that in some schools of thought, they say that aging is a disease that we haven't been able to solve. Our bodies aren't able to solve it because they're not smart enough. So as soon as we have smart enough machines, and we have a lot more data, and we have very sophisticated algorithms, we'll be able to solve it. And you say, wow, can they solve death? You can imagine there would be a great market response for this, right? But today, I want to ask an even harder question. I want to ask a question that invites us to unravel some of the unconscious assumptions that we might have baked into our algorithms. And the question for me is, can we solve love and forgiveness? Or is that even something to be solved? What does it take? And to illustrate that, I actually have an example of a video. If you can turn up the volume here.
On November 5th, 2003, all doubt of Ridgway's guilt was erased. He pleaded guilty to the murders of 48 women. He'd made a deal to cooperate with the prosecution to provide more information on his victims and the whereabouts of their remains. In doing so, he avoided a trial and possible death penalty.
Mr. Ridgway, how do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree as charged in count 1 for the death of Wendy Lee Caulfield?
Guilty.
How do you plead to the charge of aggravated murder in the first degree as charged in count 2?
Guilty. Guilty. Guilty.
It's like he didn't have any remorse at all for what he had done. You know, he'd killed so many people, he didn't remember who they were, what they looked like. I just couldn't believe that somebody could kill all those people and not remember them.
Neither could the angry relatives of his victims, who were invited to speak in court when Ridgway was sentenced to life without parole on December 18th, 2003.
You had said your memory, when it comes to all of the women you took, was gone. Our memory is not. In your words, you said that they didn't mean anything to you, but she meant everything to us.
She was a mother, she was a wife, she was a sister, and we miss her.
Gary Ridgway sat there stone-faced as victims' relatives damned him and mocked him.
He's an animal. I wish for him to have a long, suffering, cruel death.
He's gonna go to hell, and that's where he belongs.
But then the emotionless facade finally cracked when the father of one of his victims appeared to surprise him with a dose of human kindness.
Mr. Ridgway, there are people here that hate you. I'm not one of them. You've made it difficult to live up to what I believe, and that is what God says to do, and that's to forgive. You are forgiven, sir.
Those tears and a statement he made to the court later that day were as close to showing real remorse as Gary Ridgway had ever come.
So here you have the fellow who committed 48 separate murders. He goes into jail, he goes to court, and he meets the father of one of those women. And this guy says, "Sir, people like you make it very difficult for me to practice my values, but I want you to know you are forgiven." What is the algorithm for that? How many conditions does it take? And are we really going to map all of those conditions? Are we even capable of that? Should we even be asking and holding that question? So this idea of inner transformation, there is an inner transformation, certainly that happened in the father, certainly that happened in the murderer. But what is the algorithm for that? And I think this is where I want to invite us into a shift from big data to deep data. This is data that, and perhaps a different instrument than just the computing apparatus. And how would you say, a lot can be said about deep data. I think intuition is a capacity to access this deep data. But let's take a look at the difference between big and deep data. Big data is understood by silicon machines, right? But we are carbon-based. You can say machines, I'm not so sure, but you can say carbon-based humans, carbon-based life. Right? Deep data is algorithmic. Deep data is intuitive. Big data, you can say, is found all over the internet. It's what powers the internet. But it is deep data that powers the web of our connection, the internet. Big data is very efficient. It is meant to be efficient. If you can do things in 5 steps, how can we do it in 3? I know because I was an optimizer, right? But deep data is resilient, and it is resilient because it is relational. And it shifts us from being transactional to being transformational. Right? That transformation that happens within us, I've experienced it so many times over the last couple days. Right? Those serendipities, the ways in which this deep data, this profoundly interconnected data, which doesn't have neat boundaries that big data does, is actually accessed by this human apparatus. We already have the technology. We are living it. So we just have to go deeper into that. And so I think the question I hold isn't one versus another, but it's really how can we marry the two? Right? We all know that marriage can be messy, but it's worth the price. Right? It's absolutely worth the price. So how do we marry big data, which clearly has a lot of strengths, and this deep data that we're already swimming in? And I think that's a great question to hold. This guy, Garry Kasparov, some of you might know him. At the age of 22, he was the best chess player in the world. He stayed that way for most of the next 20 years. And he retired at being number 1 in the world. Garry Kasparov, in 1997, played IBM's Deep Blue. And he lost. And everyone was saying, wow, machines are getting smarter, they're going to take over human beings. And Garry Kasparov had an interesting, of course, there were the initial reactions, but at the end of it, he kind of said, oh, wait a second, I didn't realize that Deep Blue had access to every single chess move that every single human being had ever made. He says, well, if I had access to that, I would win. And so they said, let's try it. And they tried it, and he was right. So you have the best chess in the world now, today, is not played by humans, clearly, since he lost and his computers have only gotten better. But best chess in the world is also not played by computers. It's actually played by a hybrid, what Kasparov calls a centaur chess. This allusion to the Greek mythic figure, half human, half horse. Centaur is where you have humans and computers. So this idea of what is now more popularly known as freestyle chess. So the idea behind freestyle chess is what it starts to invite us to think about is that there are multiple forms of intelligence. And there are some forms of intelligence that computers are amazing at. But there are some forms of intelligence that our carbon-based apparatus is amazing at as well. And so we must innovate solutions that leverage these multiple forms of intelligence. And that really begs the question, well, what is an example of something that is uniquely human? What is an example of something that only humans might be able to do? And you can go down the list of these questions, or the list of these attributes, but I actually had an encounter with the Dalai Lama a few years ago where he shared a beautiful quote that day. And that was, he says, that's me and the Dalai Lama, and he says, technology can greatly increase human ability, but technology cannot produce compassion. Dalai Lama knows a thing or two about compassion, right? He's not just talking about compassion as an emotion, compassion as sort of this sympathetic response when you see someone suffering. He's not even talking about it as empathy. He's talking about something much deeper. He's talking about something way more fundamental to humanity, and he's saying that's a uniquely human trait. And maybe not just human, a unique trait for all life. And so, how do you start to amplify that? And in service space, we've started with that principle, and we said, let's build solutions that innovate this different kind of intelligence. As I said, we started in 1999 to build websites for nonprofits. And then it started to become an ecosystem of all kinds of different projects. We have a portal for just good news online. We have a portal for inspiring videos that we were just talking about at lunch today. You can go down the list. We have a game of kindness that allows for small acts of kindness to spread. But what I want to talk about is this example of Karma Kitchen, because it's a great example to reflect on, and it's also a great hybrid of this big and deep data. So you walk into this restaurant. Karma Kitchen is a pop-up restaurant. A bunch of volunteers take over a restaurant, and you walk into this restaurant and you get a meal like you would any other day, except that at the end of the meal, your check reads 0. Your bill is 0. It's 0 because someone before you paid for you, and you get a chance to pay forward for people after you. And most people say, oh, that can't work. You know, they initially, now there's a lot of research on it too. Initially, people were like, oh, you guys, that's crazy. People are fundamentally selfish, and they'll just maximize self-interest, and so they'll not pay. And we said, look, if they don't pay, we'll stop. Right? It was a one-time experiment. It ends up continuing week after week after week after week, tens of thousands of people, and we're like, wow, we're really onto something. Now it's been experimented in 24 countries around the world. And it really starts to reshape the narrative of who we are as human beings. There's actually research on this. At UC Berkeley, they did this research, and the title of that research read, Paying More When Paying for Others. That people, when they're actually moved by love, they respond with even greater love. And you say, wow, that's kind of amazing. But what is really amazing, this is the check at the end. Everyone actually gets a check that says 0. But the sort of secret sauce underneath it is that it's run all by volunteers. So this is an example of a crew that comes in. So you walk in, you have a meal, and the person who greets you, they've taken their Sunday off to serve you. The person who waits your tables, they've taken the Sunday off. The person who is plating your tables, plating your food in the back, is just there to serve you. The person who is bussing your tables is a volunteer. The person who is doing the dishes is a volunteer. And you say, wow, all these people are just here to serve me, just so I can have an experience in generosity? And it completely moves you. And the reason why we can do that, see, usually if you have to organize 10 volunteers, you can do it in a certain way. But then if you go from 10 to 100 to 1,000, to let's say 10,000, too much overhead. And when you have a lot of overhead, what do? You have to hire a few staff to manage it. And as soon as you have a few staff, you've got to have a fundraising strategy. As soon as you have a fundraising strategy, you start to look at people somewhat as numbers. And as that scales up, you most certainly do. Right? So it starts to strip away this raw organic energy that is present in every interaction of Karma Kitchen. And the reason why we're able to do that is precisely because we've been able to marry deep data. We've been able to take algorithms to reduce our organizing overhead and allow us to create solutions that are offered in the spirit of inner transformation. And how does transformation happen in a place like this? Right? I remember I was volunteering. This was several years ago. And all these people are coming in. And at that point, I think Karma Kitchen in the city where we had started it, in Berkeley, it was the top-rated restaurant across all of Berkeley. Right? And it's run by volunteers who have like a 45-minute orientation before they start. Right? If that's, and we have no HR department, it's like, if that's not a testimony to love, I don't know what is. So every week, it's amazing to see. I would see all these random people come together, and they're just kind of fall into this flow and this coordination, and people are moved and they are moved. I remember one of those times I was outside, this guy comes in, this Cuban guy, big guy, he's got tattoos all over him. And he looks at this situation, he comes in and he kind of like comes in unexpected. He's like, hey, what's going on here? And I said, yeah, would you like a table? He's like, what's going on here? Everybody seems so happy. I was like, yeah, well, we run this restaurant as an experiment in generosity. He's like, and he explained it. And as I was explaining it to him, he was kind of like breaking down a little bit. And I said, would you like to have a table? And he says, yeah, that would be great. And I said, sure, how about here? He says, no, actually, can I get that one in the back? I said, fine. So he kind of walks up to the back, sits down, looks at the menu. While he's looking at the menu, he just starts sobbing. And I looked at that from a distance. I thought, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to intrude. After a while, he continued. So I went up and I said, hey, brother, is everything all right? He looks at me and he says, man, I used to steal from this place 17 years ago. I used to be a food thief because I didn't have enough for my family, and so I would wait outside. And as soon as they do those food deliveries, they go in to restock, I go in, steal the food. To come into that same place and to be treated with this kind of love and respect, I am moved. I know you guys don't just allow drop-in volunteers, but you have to give me a chance to serve. I want to do everybody's dishes. That is transformation. That is not predictable. It is not formulaic. You cannot put it in an algorithm. It emerges from a field of deep relationships. It emerges in a field when all its actors are behaving with compassion. And this is not just limited to Karma Kitchen. It happens everywhere. It's actually all around us, except that we don't notice it. Right? This is a guy whose story, the choice, ultimately, I think, is ours. I want to end with one story, but I want to leave you with this choice that we all have. Are we going to embrace this creative tension between the technological revolution and our inner revolution? And if we don't, what we'll start seeing is this kind of a fight. Drones and eagles are going at each other at the moment. I don't know if you know that. And eagles are winning. And they've actually started to co-opt the eagles' capacity to take down drones for this anti-terrorism units, right? But drones are only going to get smarter. They're only going to get bigger. They're only going to get stronger. Do we really want to fight this? Or can we evolve in a symbiotic relationship that allows us to dance? And when you do this dance, there is this elegance, but underneath it, there are these opposing forces that are held together. This is a fellow who invites us to step into that space of dance. This is Wesley Autry. Wesley Autry was going down in the subway in New York. And all of a sudden, he's on 137th Street station, right, with his two daughters. And all of a sudden, a passenger, a stranger that he didn't know, goes into a seizure. He falls down on the tracks. And Wesley immediately says, oh my God, he gives his daughters to other people. He jumps on the track to save this person. He notices that, oh, there's a subway train coming. There is no way I can get up and put this guy back on. He says, that's okay. I'm going down with him. And he pins him down. He goes super flat as he can to save that guy. The subway realized this, the subway driver, but before the subway driver could brake, every single bogie had crossed over, except the last two. The cap on his hat, the hat on his head, right? That's Wesley with a little WES on his hard hat, had grease on it. And that is not predictable. That is not science. That, we would say, is irrational. He had two daughters. He put not only his own family, he sacrificed his own life for a complete stranger on that train track. And that is not a result of something that is formulaic. That is something that emerges from within. And how do we learn to honor that deep intelligence that is already native in all of us? How do we learn to marry it with the computing power, the awesome computing power, the ginormous big data, and the sophisticated algorithms that are now all over the place? How do we make sure that we lead with this kind of love? How do we make sure that instead of trying to dominate nature, we're actually in concert with its emergence? I think that's the invitation, and I hope that all of us, at the end of the day, if we ever get stuck, A, B, C, or D, that we all continue to choose love. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nipun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very inspiring. And I think...
Thank you. Oh, man. They are so kind. They are so kind. Thank you, Alfred.
It was so important, I think.
I would have left, but they told me not to leave, so I'm stuck here. I was feeling embarrassed, but I appreciate it. I hope we can all hug each other before we go, you know. Or if not one-on-one, at least with each other, you know. So.
I think the really big question is, do we want to marry big data and deep data? Do we really want to marry the human entities with algorithm and artificial intelligence?
Big question.
Big questions, and I decided already.
You want a divorce? We may not have a choice.
And I think it's a big question whether we really want to have somebody controlling us. Yeah? Do we really want to have the real big control of all our thoughts, our actions, everything? Okay, I think now we...
And can I just take a moment to thank this wonderful giant of a man, this guy. He has put so much love into this. I know this is probably not the time to embarrass him, but I can say honestly that he just said, if Alfred says come, I do it, just because of the sincerity with which he brings all this manifest energy in the world. And so I really feel honored to be a friend of Alfred and to be in all your field. I hope that our tribe grows. I thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think all of us are doing a great job, and if we're taking a little piece of inspiration from these days or from other days, you experience a similar kind of, deepness, then we all together are able to transform and build a new world which is based on love and compassion. What Nipun just said. Thank you for being here, and thank you for continuing. The next